All right. We have a short reading this morning, taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 3, called the Proclamation of John the Baptist. In those days, John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness of Judea, proclaiming, "Repent, for the dominion of heaven has come near. This is the one of whom the prophet Isaiah spoke when he said, 'The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make the paths of the Lord straight.'" It's interesting this morning because the topic of the sermon actually came to me before the reading, which is this idea of making the paths of the Lord straight. This is a concept that I love, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I interpret it. And also I'm going to talk to you about the idea of when love is guiding you to move on from something. Some of you may know that this past summer, early July, I went back to Canada and I saw my family. I hadn't seen them in a number of years. And I had been in a state of conflict with my older brother because of something that happened about 3.5 years ago now. And I had the sense that, well, if we get together and we chat face to face, of course we'll resolve it, because human beings have that capacity, to communicate. And I've had a lot of training in nonviolent communication, meaning, non-blaming and non-defensive, and just seeking to listen and understand and then speak truth. And there had been a few times over the years, since we had been disconnected, really on his impetus, that through my dad strangely was almost trying to repair the relationship. I would communicate with my dad. We didn't communicate that much, but usually through email, and he would write back, "Is it okay if I forward this message to Mark?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." And I thought at some point, Mark would either reach out or there would be some sort of sense of desire to return, because we had a pretty good friendship, him and I. But nothing ever came. He never wrote. And when I was heading over to Toronto, I wrote an email to him and said, "I'm going to be in town. I'm wondering if you would like to get together and see if we can talk through things." And initially, a few days went by and nothing. And I thought, well, I'll give it one more shot. So I sent a second email, and he did respond to the second one saying, "Yeah, let's get together." So I was pretty hopeful about that. Now, the last time we spoke, about 3.5 years ago, he had some pretty intense accusations against me. Because of something that had happened, I think I might have shared with some of you, he was traveling in Israel, and he had sent out a group email to 12 people, I think. And it was like a travel diary kind of thing, It wasn't personal to me. And it was kind of like, well, I just left, I was staying with this couple, and it was kind of a little bit artsy and a little bit like, he was doing some creative writing, and it was interesting. But I didn't respond to it. And that sort of kind of in his mind ended the relationship, the fact that I didn't respond to the email. Now, as you guys know, I send out a lot of group emails in our community, and been doing that for a long time as part of the spiritual journey. And my perspective is that I don't expect everybody to respond. If I send out an email to 15 people, typically 2 or 3 will respond. And if the email is asking, "Please respond," then maybe I'll get 10 people respond, which I kind of assume is normal. In his mind, it was a huge betrayal of the friendship that I didn't respond. And I didn't know that at the time, but I never heard from him again on his trip. And then when I called him, I could tell that he had been hurt, and now he was distant. And then he started formulating an opinion about me, which was pretty negative and not really true. And the last of the conversation was like, "Well, I know you're this kind of person," and he threw out these accusations. So I was like, wow, how did we get from didn't respond to your email to, I'm a jerk? But he didn't have the language, and I guess we didn't have that shared way of communicating where we could get to what the issue was. But I recall apologizing. I remember I was like, "I didn't realize it was that important to you. And I'm sorry that I didn't respond," which is true. Anyways, So now 3.5 years later, I drive over to his apartment. He comes down. He's very warm, shaking hands. It's calm. Oh, you look good, and all this stuff. And we're driving. He wants to go take a walk on the beach, one of the beaches of, I think it's Lake Ontario. So we're driving to this place, and having a good chat. Chatting really easily, and he's telling me about what's been going on with him. And in a way, it's almost like there was never any break. But inside, I don't feel resolved about what transpired. So we're chatting, and he's telling me about that he had been involved recently in a romantic relationship with a married woman, and that didn't make me feel good. I didn't say anything about it. We talked about how we would hang out and have dinner with this woman and her husband, and then he and her would go for a walk and be physical in the woods, which again struck me as, for where I'm at in my consciousness, I didn't feel good about it. I didn't say anything about it. He's a criminal defense attorney. And for a long time, he was really sick of it, so he would just do bail hearings, which I don't know much about it, but he apparently can go to the courthouse and just show up and find people who need representation, and he was able to make a decent living that way, like working a couple days a week on the weekends. But now, all of a sudden, he was telling me he took a case. He was representing this accused not child molester, sexual predator, whatever, like sexual offender, who had been previously convicted and now was on a second charge. And it was interesting because he was really, he didn't like doing trials, and he really didn't like being a lawyer, but he had gotten really engaged. He had spent a few all-nighters working on trying to find a way to get this guy off. And at the same time, when he spoke about him, he was like, the guy's a total psychopath. Oh, I have no doubt that he's totally guilty. So I'm like, well, in my mind, I go, that's odd that you feel that way. You're pretty certain about it. And at the same time, you're willing to, spend nights staying awake all night trying to get the guy off, I guess. But again, I didn't say anything. And to a certain degree, my older brother is the one that has the most consistent relationship with my dad. They talk several times a week. I, over the years, have come to respect and appreciate connecting with my dad a few times a year. And actually lately, with the sale of my house, it's been a little more frequent because he has experience and he's helped me out. And we have a good adult relationship now that I feel my dad really appreciates, and it's kind of cool. I'm surprised. My older brother is in continual communication with him. But when he speaks about my dad, it's pretty negative. He's really critical of my dad. What I realized was happening, because we walked along the beach, and my brother was not willing to make any concessions to. He was still pretty convinced that I was this jerk, and that what I did was totally wrong, and how could I not respond to him? He's like, you know what it's like to be traveling, and you didn't write to me. I mean, there was no room in his mind for how I might have experienced that. Now, I could have went, okay, well, let's just forget about that. And then I realized I was going to fit into this pattern where he had a relationship with me, but he also had a very critical impression of me. And I was looking at that in meditation. I was seeing the consistencies of, being attracted to and wanting to be with a woman who's with somebody else. And representing somebody in all your heart, you're trying to get them off. At the same time, you think they're totally guilty. And having this sort of prideful perspective, like, yeah, I'm the one of the three sons that's loyal to our father, and yet he's a total jerk and an a-hole. So I didn't want to become one of these things, where my brother had this impression of me and yet has this sort of surfacey, cordial, or even relatively connected relationship. And so when I realized he wasn't going to budge at all, and he was going to hold on to his idea, and I apologized several times, and asked him to take some responsibility for the fact that I had told him ahead of time that I don't do well with group emails. I don't always respond to them. I'll try, but I'm not sure where I'm going to be at. He had said that never happened. I never said that. So there was no room, no flexibility at all. How does this tie into the reading? It ties into the reading because when I hear John the Baptist say, "Make the ways of the Lord straight," I want to have relationships that allow for transparency and clarity. I don't want to be having a relationship with my brother where we're having this great connection, and yet there's this aspect to it that is not fixed, and he doesn't want to fix it. And he maintains the right to turn on me as being a jerk when he wants to. Now, I don't think my brother is a malicious person. I think it's an act of protection. I don't know if he has the skills or the development yet spiritually to forgive. I think that's hard for a lot of people. I mean, I counsel a lot of people who have come to me over the years when I was opening Meditate. And generally, I can feel pretty, how the forgiveness is going to be a critical piece. And for some people, it's just they can't fathom it. I was thinking about an individual who was a professional sports player and on a major league team, and he came to me, and he had a challenge with a prior coach. This coach, when they were the assistant coach of the team, was encouraging and supportive and just saw all these great things about him. But then it looked like that assistant coach was going to be promoted to the head coach. And he did get promoted to the head coach. Now, we deduced from figuring out all his experiences that probably when he was head coach, this guy was not going to be one of his guys. Because, they take out coaches. I mean, in professional sports, they move coaches around all the time. It's like if you have 3 bad seasons, that's it. I don't know, maybe it's 1 bad season. But when you bring in a new coach, there's a lot of pressure for them to make changes, to try to have a winning season. So this guy, my client, when the coach got promoted to head coach, started doing all these weird things to undermine his confidence. Saying, well, you need to work on this, you're not really good at this, and I'm not really sure I see you in this position anymore. This is somebody that the guy had trusted for a long time and worked, and had really grown under him as an assistant coach. And for months, he was trying to figure out, how do I do the things? I want to play well, I want to be a starter, or whatever it is. But the head coach, the promoted head coach, actually had an agenda, which was to get rid of him. But you can't just get rid of somebody, so you do it in a strange way. That is not a straight path to the Lord. That's a crooked path, right? Trying to achieve your means through dishonesty. That really, really hurt this guy a lot. I mean, this is like a 6'4" guy, 280 pounds. I mean, you'd think of him as but he's a real soft guy, and he's really sweet, and he really trusted me, and he really wanted to heal. And I said, well, we got to do a forgiveness process towards this guy. And he's like, oh my God. I mean, I saw his eyes go, how in the world? I mean, this guy, when I figured out what he was doing, I was like, oh my God, this guy is such an ambitious whatever. It was really, really hard for him. So we just started the process. The process begins with, well, write a letter and just get it all out, and let's see what's going on. And the letter was like, oh my God. I mean, it wasn't just his anger. It was like, this is the kind of despicable human being you are, and swearing and all. And that was good. I wanted to see the depths of what was going on. And then eventually through drafts, and some of you have been through this process where we go through draft after draft in order to refine to a point where your anger dissipates, and ultimately you're just saying, this is how I felt as a result of your treatment. You don't even say, this is what you did to me, because we don't even take that step of telling the person what they did. We just said, when you did this, this is how it felt. And then I had him do meditations where he met with this guy face to face, and he talked to him, and he got a chance to speak all of his anger out, and he let the guy speak back. And this is a high profile coach for a major league team that he's seeing on TV, and it's like, oh my God. Every time he saw him, his blood would boil. And over about 6 months, he actually got to a point where it's like, I think it's finished. Because eventually we start to go, well, move yourself into the position of this man. He's going like, oh, here's an opportunity to be a major league coach. So he's going to do whatever he needs to do to get there, and you happen to be a casualty along the way. I said, have you ever taken steps where you might have disregarded somebody's feelings in order for you to get where you wanted to go? And he was like, instantly, it's like, oh yeah, totally. Now that helped him to go like, this guy's not that different than me. Of course, oh my God, all of a sudden, how can I live with the fact that this guy's not that different than me? For years, I've thought he's the most despicable human. Well, this is an advanced spiritual moment where you go, really, we're all kind of bumbling along here. Last example I want to give you, watching a movie recently. And in this movie, there's a 15-year-old boy and his mother, who's like about 45 or something like that. And the dad's out of the picture, and so the kid is starting to come of age, and the mom is trying to figure out, how do I guide my 15-year-old son? And she has people that stay in the house. She owns a big house, she has boarders in the house, so he's subject to these other people that are kind of like influences. And there's this girl in the neighborhood, he's 15, the 17-year-old girl in the neighborhood crawls into his window at night and sleeps in his bed, but she won't be sexual with him. She really likes him, they have a good friendship. He really likes her and wants to be sexual with her. And she does all sorts of misleading things. You know, she strokes his hair and she cuddles up to him, but she won't be sexual with him. And then one of the other women who lives in the house at some point goes like, you can't let her sleep in your bed because it's disempowering to you. And later on, we find out that the reason that this 17-year-old girl won't sleep with him is because she goes, well, I'm too close to you. I like to have sex with boys where I don't care. So that's another example of where the path is not straight. It is correct to have feelings for somebody, and if it's appropriate, develop the relationship and turn it into a committed and sexual relationship. Of course, we're meant to do that. There's so many people, though, that have these twisted ideas. And where do these twisted ideas come from? Well, usually part of our upbringing. The paths were not straight in our household. So maybe this girl got really wounded because her dad was never around, and I don't know what. And so now she can't form an intimate connection that goes sexual because maybe she's too vulnerable. So she sort of uses the one guy as her emotional comfort and then uses the other guy as her sexual comfort. So that's not the straight path. The straight path is I find one person and I invest in that relationship. And I wait until I'm comfortable enough and I'm vulnerable, and then I move it into a place of greater intimacy. That's what we're striving to do here. And I really believe that that's why God said you should be married before you be sexual, because it takes a lot before you're going to decide to get married. And it's the understanding that when you start to be sexual with somebody, that really changes the dynamic a lot. I'm not somebody who preaches like that's exactly how you have to do it, because I think culturally we're just too far from that. Most people are not going to adhere to that. So I don't have a strong agenda for that. But it makes sense to me, actually, that there would be a strong commitment before you open those floodgates. What I really want to talk about is when you are involved in something that is crooked. And I don't mean crooked like a crime. I mean crooked in that the pathways are not straight. The kid in the movie finally did say to the girl, you can't sleep here anymore. And then she was like, oh, well, let's give it a try. You know, once he threatened to take away the intimacy. There comes a time when the seasons of certain things in your life are coming to an end. And that's mostly because you're outgrowing them. In this path, if you're a student or not a student, but you're coming here regularly, you're going to be getting injection of concepts and ideas and energy that are going to accelerate your growth. So especially in the first year of discovering this kind of approach, this Christ-centered life, you should not be surprised if you start to recognize all these crooked paths in your life, in your relationships, in your agreements, in your work life, etc. That these situations no longer really work for you. I think it's timely because I can definitely feel the fall starting to come in. I see the plants around my garden are starting to show signs that they're into the dying phase. There's holes in the leaves, there's some more brownness, things are starting to sag. Certain stalks are completely dried out. So the plants know that the season is coming to an end. Some of them hang on longer than others. But when you wake up and it's 53 degrees, and it's going to get up to 80 today, but you don't wake up and it's 72. So we can feel that the season is coming to an end. And I love how God does it because it's gradual. I mean, we could still get some pockets of weather where we even hit 90 degrees in September or October. But we all know what's coming. There's going to be a point where people are wearing more long sleeve and long pants, and you're moving into the fall clothing and eventually the winter. What I would like you to do is I would like you to consider the agreements that you are currently involved with. which includes your work and your relationships and your friendships and even the agreements within yourself. Well, this is the kind of person I am. This is how I see things. If you begin to recognize that these are not straight paths, then I would like you to make them straight. Now that requires some courage and it requires some faith. But in the same way that I did not feel willing to go like, well, my brother is going to think about me this way, but I really want to have the relationship with him, so I'm going to forget about that. I'm not that kind of person. Maybe a different person, even maybe a priest might say, well, I'm going to stay in the relationship and maybe over time I will be able to erode at his impression of me. And that may have been a way to go. When I'm sitting there face to face with him and I see no movement at all, and then he calls me, like when I get back, he called me a week later, so I want to talk. I thought, oh, maybe he's now starting to see it. No, nothing. I don't even know why exactly he called me. So I do not want to invest in that. I let him know, like, hey, I'm available to talk if at any point your mind changes about me, but I don't see us having a friendship based on this type of foundation. And I have lived this way for a long time, where when I really feel like the paths are not straight, then it's time to move on. I don't want you to get the impression that I feel that way about our spiritual community, because that's not what actually propelled me to make a decision to go and see the world. There's a lot of factors, some of which I don't really feel comfortable sharing, but I'll just give you the outline, which is, the organization that I was with prior had some issues, leadership issues, power issues, that, I need a little bit of a break from some of these patterns in order to sort out and see who I am as a priest and a brother teacher. I did find myself getting a little bit burnt out of running the meditation business. Never burnt out of being a priest in this community. But the guidance within was like, it would be good to take a sabbatical. So I don't want you to have any ideas that there was something wrong with our community, because this is the one thing that pulls the most on me. It's the hardest thing to take a break from. And I don't want to take a break from spirituality. But I want you to be free to examine the kind of work you do, the friendships you have, the attitudes you have, and go, have I made the paths straight so that the Lord can move here? If I haven't, okay, don't freak out, don't turn on yourself. But go, what would it take for me to make these paths straight? There are certain people, the reason that we listen to some of these songs today is I want you to trust that God is leading you, and I want you to let go of things that you may have been trying so hard to figure out how to work. And they're not working. There's a lot of concepts that we enter onto the spiritual pathway. Let's say there's a concept about family. Well, family must be this way. Like I was saying, I would love it if people courted and then got committed and then got married and then started a sexual relationship, because I think the world would actually look like a better place. It wouldn't make sex such an emphasized thing. But that's not how it is. So if somebody is going to be one of these people, it's like, well, I have to do it according to how God is. Like, I'm going to only do it this way. Okay, so they can be committed to that. In a city like Chicago, it might be hard to find people who are willing to date you, because it doesn't necessarily work in a big urban modern city. So you might have to shift that a little bit. I think Christianity gets into trouble where it goes like, well, this is it, and if you don't do this, you're going to hell. I mean, I don't approach it that way. But at the same time, look at the fruits of whatever you're involved with. If you find yourself in a relationship or a work situation, and generally there's a sort of a dread about it, a heaviness, a frustration that's pretty constant, with some glimpses of hope, well, what are those fruits? Are those good enough fruits to continue investing? Is the path straight for you to get to, everything is growing. If the situation in the relationship is not growing, then I don't know if the path is straight. That doesn't mean you have to walk away the next day. But you have to allow for the accelerated growth that occurs when you truly walk a spiritual path. And as such, there are great things waiting for you. You have to be willing to disconnect from some of the old things that may not be working for you. So I really want to encourage you to look at that and go, do I have the faith that God will fill in if I let go? I really feel that is the case. I mean, I would say I know it is the case.